Afternoon, everyone. We awake? No? All right, well, hopefully you'll be awake after we talk about business case, right? Because super exciting. That was an awesome discussion of design. We're, I think, literally going to talk about the opposite now, which is making this make financial sense to everybody else that's not a designer or an architect or anybody else in this room. So thank you all for joining us. As with any new technology or innovative approach, you have to talk about the importance of the business case in order to make it scalable. And so that's what we're here. We've assembled an awesome panel here to talk about the different aspects of technology in the timber space and just talk about from that perspective. Because of the relative diversity of this panel, I've asked them each to put together just a couple slides about their company so that you can get some understanding of what their perspective is, where they come from, and then in the process they'll introduce themselves as well. So we have a ton of experience here on this panel. So it's been relatively quiet as far as questions. Thank you for asking a few last time, but please mull over some questions in your head and come to the microphone. We want to keep this fairly conversational, so after the initial slides, we're just going to kind of open it up for Q&A and discussion. So on that point, hopefully the next slide is, hey, look at that. All right, so Javier, I'll let you go first.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me, and great to be part of this panel. Just introducing the company, so I started CadMakers about 8 years ago. I had less gray hair and a few less pounds. In those days, it's been a long journey, but we operate like two companies in one at the moment. So we have a services business where we do a lot of digital construction, digital fabrication type work on mass timber projects. We're fortunate to have been involved with something like 60 or 70 mass timber projects around the world. Some really exciting ones like PDX, which was shown earlier, and others. So we have a team of engineers and coders that are building tools, bespoke tools for specific projects to solve problems in those projects. And then we have a product side, so we have a couple SaaS applications. If you want to switch to the next slide. One's around logistics, site logistics, so it's a platform for people to simulate site logistics in the web and visualize the, I'm going to talk about the A in the DFMA, the on-site stuff, which is a tricky part of the whole equation. And then last, we have another product on our platform, track and trace, so if you want to go to the next slide. This is connecting all the four walls of the factory to the construction site and the various project stakeholders to track production, do 3D nesting, optimization of the actual delivery of the project. So that's us.
Great, thank you so much. Stephen, you're next.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
So my name's Stephen Powney. I work for ABB Robotics in Canada, and I'm working with our global team to look at the construction industry and understand how we can help impact the industry. So the first slide here is why I'm here. Our business case in the construction industry. So we did a very large survey across the globe. We've had 150 offices in 65 countries, of which 20 of them were asked to talk to a lot of construction companies. And you'll see some figures there of why ABB now are very, very interested in pushing forward in the construction industry. A lot of information there. The key notes from here is 65% of respondents are planning to introduce automation within the next 10 years. So 65% of construction companies will be introducing robotics and automation in the next 10 years. Number one is a sustainability factor. And I think the most important one for us is that 91% of all people that was interviewed believe there'll be a very large skill shortage over the next 5 to 10 years. And that accompanying with the need for affordable and sustainable housing is a very key indicator of why we're here. So the next slide, please. So how do we plan to do this? We're going to, and I know there's been a lot of talk about automotive industry automation, but we've been in this automation industry with robotics since the 70s. So we've been at this 50 years now. We've also been in general industry, which encompasses a lot of different industries, other than construction so much, from the 80s. So we've had 40, 50 years of introduction of automation and robotics in many different sectors. And now we believe, because of what's happening with your software, your digital nature of your business, now we believe that we can bring a lot to bear from those industries into construction and help the construction industry move forward. And our strategic plan is to do that, exactly that. And if the next slide, just quickly, some of the things also, as we move forwards in this industry, we've got a whole suite of tools which we use in many different industries, not just in automation, but in other aspects of ABB. We can have condition monitoring, remote access to help service, fleet assessment. So there's a lot of different aspects within the service and the digital nature of the inputs coming back from the factories, which we can help make these factories a lot more responsive and a lot more efficient as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Keith, and Helen and Jerry for making this event happen and for the invitation. Intelligent City is using technological innovation to productize housing. So the question we are asking ourselves when we started developing these technologies was, what kind of platform, building platform or technology platform, do we need to develop that is scalable enough so that we can bring it across the country and the continent, but also customizable enough so that we can actually accommodate all these different sites and jurisdictions and client needs and design choices that really are necessary to make buildings attractive and applicable to the different cities and jurisdictions and climates. So Intelligent City is doing basically a two-pronged approach to solving that. On the one hand, if you go to the next slide, we are developing our own automation technology to manufacture building components so that they can be as adaptable and customizable as possible while they're following a similar underlying platform that ensures that building components and ultimately the entire building is as high quality as possible. And then on the other side, we are using software automation to actually design the buildings and use that knowledge of what kind of building systems are possible, how they are integrated, and how the entire building works to navigate that solution space, basically, that we are creating ourselves, and immediately basically get to a fully detailed building within that process. If you go to the next slide. So basically we are integrating end-to-end from design to manufacturing the entire understanding of how the building comes together, how these building components work, and ultimately what kind of designs are possible. So with that kind of platform thinking, a developer can basically design a building using our technology, investigate different design choices, apartment, stacking options, find the right density, the right kind of mix, and the right kind of value, while at the same time always knowing that whatever is being designed is actually buildable, and we can guarantee that it's being built at a certain schedule and also for a certain cost.
Thank you so much. And Brandon, go for it.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. Brandon Lee here, Manager of Customer Success at Procore. Procore is a software service, cloud-based project management information system solution that really focuses on basically the bidding, tendering, estimating phases of a project throughout the course of construction. But wanted to really just highlight a few of the local customers we have here, some of their projects. But if we can go to the next slide, please, Keith. First one from the crest from Adira here in the Lower Mainland. Adira's been a customer for a number of years, just a few blocks away. Good partnership there. Case study that we have with them, and some of the on the topic of ROI. A good case study on our website there with our partnership with Adira. And then the next couple projects are a couple of Urban Ones projects here in town as well. Another long-term partner of Procore locally or in Canada for us. as well with a tall wood house and the next slide, please, Keith. UBC Gateway. They're just showcasing 3 of local customers' mass timber projects, and then the final one from another customer, Scott Construction, part of the IDL Ventures group. That I'm not sure which of these 3 customers has been ours the longest in Canada. They've both been pretty good partners over the last 4 or 5 plus years. But I think in the next portion of the conversation, go into a little bit more around Procore, ROI, value realization, and just making sure, especially my experience with the customer success team, is really just making sure, like Procore is not a cheap solution at all, so making sure that our partners, our customers, get the most bang for their buck or return on investment. But yeah, thank you all for having us.
Great, thank you, Bryan. And finally, BSI. So BSI stands for British Standards Institute. Some of you may have heard of us. We are one of the founding members of ISO, International Standards Organization. Been around for about 120 years. We're known as a standards organization. We're the national standards body in the UK. We are the largest certification body in the world, and we operate just about everywhere. I like to say we're in the business of trust. There are 2 aspects to that. The first is what everybody thinks of, which is certification to existing standards, making sure you're doing things along with best practices. And the other half of that is new technologies and new services and figuring out what are the best practices of those. So a lot of just shaping, bringing industry together for writing of new standards and consulting to figure out how to apply best practices across the board. So feel free to scan the QR code if you're quick. You've got about 3 seconds. Oh, and I am the director of the built environment for North America. So I do anything having to do with all the stuff we're talking about today. And that is it as far as slides. Our information is up there. Now I'm going to start just a Q&A session here. And Brandon, I will start with you. So obviously the construction industry has been, sort of historically slow to adopt technology. I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, maybe the value of moving towards digital solutions as far as, project management and all aspects of that.
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. I think construction is definitely one of the last large vertical industries in the world to make that transformation from analog to the digital world. We see it every single day. Obviously, for me, from the Procore side, just live and breathe Procore. But with what we see is obviously if everything's living in an analog world, just the inefficiency of getting the right information to the right stakeholders on a project just increases that amount of time. And during that time of not having the right information to make the right decisions or basically build the right thing, just creates higher costs with rework and just inefficiency of not living in that digital world, Keith. Oh.
Thank you. Turning it over to either Javier or OD, if you can just comment on, both of your companies provide software that helps with automation or digital visualization of these processes. If you can talk to just the importance to the industry of adopting these. Like, what value do we realize by adopting the type of tools that you're developing? Either one of you. And anybody else, feel free to, pile on once they say something.
Yeah, I think when you, both actually, CadMakers and Procore, I think, provide an incredible value to the industry in general to kind of promote every player, part of the industry, to digitize and adopt, tool sets that actually are becoming the new standard. I think that's extremely important because, as Brandon just mentioned, it's a fragmented industry, right? And it's fragmented in many directions. It's fragmented between companies, it's fragmented between projects, and it's fragmented between disciplines, right? So innovating in just one discipline and changing the interface within that discipline doesn't work if other disciplines don't pull along. So I think that's extremely important, and we just see the benefits in many projects just slowly, coming to fruition. The software that Intelligent City is developing, or the automation that we are developing, is internally. It's basically there's no way around for us to not use technology. I think Shajay's presentation before was really telling, because all that level of configuration and sort of customization cannot be done in a manual way. You need some kind of software intelligence to control that and give either the designer or the user or the client a level of control that is easy to understand. So ultimately, you're building your own design tool along the way as you're building the underlying logic. So for us, it's about our own control, about understanding what is possible from a manufacturing point of view, because we have our own manufacturing, but also, of course, just generally from a zoning and code point of view. But it's also then, of course, immediately a piece of software that we can use to manufacture our own components. So it just ties it all together in this automatic integration, basically, that happens along the way as you develop that logic. Now, this might not be the only business model for the future. For sure, there are many other approaches, I think. But it is, at least for us, is what really ties it all together, is that kind of software automation.
Yeah, I think I'll add a little bit to that. I think from what I've seen in my career, especially it's been accelerated the last 10 years, let's say, if you look at the project life cycle from acquiring land through to completing, occupying a building, maybe even taking that building down and repurposing that space. If you look at like a software stack, every single layer of that stack is just incrementally being digitized, right? So if you think of even acquiring land now, people are iBuyers and just buying land off satellite imagery and other types of like remote technologies, through to how they design those spaces in terms of optimizing for floor area and net buildable area and whatever's a permitted zoned building in that space, and things like green space and all that kind of stuff, being completely digitized by folks like some folks in the room here doing amazing design work through the documentation, delivery, and obviously manufacturing of these parts. And I'd say that all projects are of scale are going through a similar transformation digitally. But I'd say mass timber, what I've seen, has basically accelerated that dramatically. Like for those who here have worked on many mass timber projects, it's almost impossible to work not in a 3D environment or kind of a machine code output environment, and it's just getting more and more. Maybe 5-6 years ago, the structure was digitized and was performed, was CNC'd from the model and was delivered to site, and then it was like, okay, well, we should pre-drill these openings for the mechanical. Why wouldn't we do that if we can, right? So that's another layer of digitization. And it's like, well, there's safety, so that's why we install the guardrails first before we fly it on site. So it's just like incrementally, the mass timber movement has really moved more and more of that digitization up, and I think it's a great, the D being the bottleneck is totally true. A lot of our industry, what I've seen is they're not ready for it, especially the design team. I love the Zaha Hadid's of the world, amazing architects. They're designers, they want to design, and when you start getting into mass timber projects, like a manufacturing problem to solve. So you need to freeze things much sooner, which is not necessarily, everyone's not necessarily comfortable for that. So to your point, and that's just moving things up the stack, right? All of a sudden now, in 50% DD, you got to have like a pretty set structure, because when you go into production, depending on the scale and size, you might have to start producing 6 months or a year before you actually can install a panel. So there's all these things are being pushed up, and it's just forcing people to adopt technology and digital technologies at a much more rapid scale, which I think, we've been fortunate to be involved with UBC. I went to UBC, so I'm a proud alumni. But the university there with Tallwood and other projects have just really done an amazing job of pushing the industry forward. And in British Columbia, I think the stat you mentioned, I didn't know this, that there's more mass timber projects in BC or something that's being in construction now are being planned than all of the United States, or some stat, like I'll get the stats wrong, but there's a lot of projects of mass timber in BC, and a lot of that's because of early adopters at universities and things, folks around here. We got a lot of trees, as you can see, so there's a big industry here, and pushing that envelope, which has forced people to adopt digital, which has forced people to get better and better each project, and it's just only incrementally improving. So, and some of the things I see as the last beacons of digitization are supply chain elements, for sure. So like thinking about transportation, how do we get these, how do we move things around? How do we optimize so that we're not sending twice as many trucks as you need to, or rail, or something like that. When you get into these prefabricated components, like Intelligent City will make, or these folks will make, these are 3D objects. It's not so easy to understand what the best way to pack these things in trucks are, and dunnage and things like that, transportation things. How do you, so instead, if you're not sure with digital, when you don't have digital tools, you just say, well, we'll just, put a fudge factor, and you end up sending 20% more trucks, right? But that's not good for the environment. That's not as efficient as you'd like to be. So I think some of those bigger opportunities in the near future are digitizing that supply chain. I know Procore is doing a lot with that, getting more sub-trades on the platform, collaborating on a digital platform to deliver in a more seamless way, and using the cloud, using digital. So timber, I think, is just a forcing function for the rest of the industry to get more digital as we go.
Yeah, for sure. Are you seeing companies that are hesitant to invest in these digital tools? And, is that a real obstacle industry? It's somewhat rhetorical of a question, but how do you overcome that? How do you get past that initial hesitancy to maybe invest in the wrong tool or spend too much money in these tools? Like, what are the solutions that you offer there?
Well, maybe I'll kick it off and pass this panel. But
Sure,
one thing
yeah.
I think the industry has a lineage of a per project concept, right? We have a per project mentality in our industry, which I know that technology providers like Procore have built business models to support that. But when you start investing into robotic automation of a factory, you can't do that for one project, right? You have to think a bit bigger across a platform of projects, a portfolio of projects, which the industry is not necessarily, if the developer or whomever is cutting the check, and they may not be in that space, right? So I think business model innovation is very much going to need to evolve along with digital innovation, because the way that projects are thought of and performed, and even got in bonding and insurance. There's like all this whole thing built around a project. Developer builds a company just for that one project. There's an entity that has that project. They're not thinking about long-term kind of stuff there. So when you start making these digital investments across multiple projects, sure, it can push the people out of their comfort zone, right? How do I prove the ROI on this if I'm not going to do this only one project, right? So I'll pass it to the rest of the group there, but I think that's one thing that the industry still needs to kind of wrap their head around, is how do I think in a portfolio instead of just a single project.
Makes sense. Odie, I think I interrupted you there. Did you have something to add?
No, actually, to a different topic. So
Okay,
I want to leave the comments up to it.
Yes, so just something like that. So we are not a construction company. ABB, we do have a smart buildings division. We have a number of other divisions that operate towards a construction industry. But the division that I represent, we're not a construction industry, technology industry. So, but we've learned over the past many years, as we say, that in order for us to be able to service different sectors, we have to be somewhat domain knowledgeable. So our plan and our strategy here is to start to understand what the construction industry needs. To start to understand that things like you've just mentioned there, that it is more of a project-based business. So as our journey, with your journey continues, one of the things that we've started to realise, and we've started to help people like David and Intelligent City with, is the understanding that the manufacturing processes, although they may be transferable from the automotive, from Caterpillars, from John Deere's, from all these industries we've done in the past, they have to be much more flexible. So they have to have lower volumes, be much more flexible, and as some people call it, a snowflake manufacturing system. So our journey is to understand how we do that and create this technology stack in order for that to happen. So that is our offer to the industry, and our knowledge on where we need to go to enable you guys to be or get return on investment when we supply automation and robot technologies within this industry.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious. Related to that, obviously robotics, when it comes to the construction and fabrication of the parts, robotics has a huge role to play in the industry. What are you seeing as far as the return on investment or the business case for investing in those types of tools? Where are you seeing it pay off?
Well, let's be clear about this. Robots are robots, okay? They're not something that will enable you to be successful. The most important thing, and the return on any investment you make, is what a lot of people have been saying, especially the last speaker. It's about getting your industry ready to automate. It's designing the products so you can be successful to make the industry successful. The car industry did exactly that. In the 70s, the car industry had to go through a big change on how they design cars to enable automation to work. They went from an aesthetic type of situation where they would throw people at it. I worked at Jaguar for many years, and we would have literally hundreds of people finishing cars, and they had to make a big change and a big investment in order to get their stampings and their parts right so that automation can work. So this is the real key here. We're here to supply technologies that will enable you to be successful, but in order for us to do that, you have to be successful yourself and get ready for this to work. And that's the return on investment that will happen once you get to that point and everyone starts to push in the same direction as many of the other industries that we've been privy and very, very fortunate to be part of in the last 30 to 40 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that automation is a journey, and especially in the construction industry, so many processes and building parts have originally been designed for manual labor, and simply automating that, simply trying to automate, how an IKEA chair is being put together, that's not the way to do it. You have to rethink how that process actually looks like when you use automation, whether that's a robot or not. But there are many, many building parts that we see also in our factories that are very good for manual labor, but they are not good for automation. And so the part has to change and the process has to change in order for that to be automated. And then you will see the benefits of it. Then you will see suddenly that things happen much faster, much more efficient, and at much higher qualities. And I think going back to the mass timber conversation earlier, I think that mass timber is also a material really that actually forces us to think more in systems logic. I think to some extent, with other building materials, maybe more was possible, more design was possible without thinking too much about how it's actually made. And that freedom allowed us to fragment more. And with mass timber systems, you have to, like you said, you have to think about the grid and the structure already much, much earlier, because you have to make sure that these kinds of panels can actually be made and delivered on site. And I think that's actually an incentive coming from the material, and then this incentive coming from automation that kind of comes together in the systems-based thinking.
I think we're in the phase of construction automation where we're in the point solution phase and we're not quite at the platform phase. People are trying to build platforms. I think it's aspirational and it's what we should try to do. But I think the challenge with construction in the current context, and I'll take kind of the other side of the story, if you're a developer, if you're a builder, like you have this issue where you have an inelastic supply and a very elastic demand for these projects. So if you ask ROI and what makes the most sense, and I think some of this robotic production can be very useful for us, is I remember when I first started building products and I didn't know what I was doing, I thought, oh, you have to build it, you have to really think through all the platform. But that's just a point solution. And actually, a point solution that solves a very specific problem in a very specific way, so components, fasteners, parts of the kit of parts that can be repeatable, can have a business model that serves multiple projects, not just one, makes a lot of sense. That's why I think a lot of the companies are doing flat pack or kit of parts kind of systems. There's a bit more flexibility there. You don't have to be like, it's not a full volumetric solution. You can play around with things and you can perfect one aspect of that element, and then you can perfect another, and eventually we'll get to a point where you can start putting it all together as a full platform in a way that serves architects and builders the way they want. So I think we're kind of at that. The nice thing about robotic production is that you can do that, right? If you can write some programs and you can build, repeatability into your manufacturing, supply chain, I think, building certain parts repeatedly overall, get the cost down, make it affordable, serves multiple projects, you have a bit more of a business case to support it. It makes a lot of sense. The modular fabricators that I've been fortunate to work with and I've learned a lot from, they just have such a tough time, right? If you don't time up that next project right when your capacities in your factory is finishing, you might have to lay off half your factory because it's not starting, it's in design, projects get delayed. It's a really challenging business, right? Whereas if you're just serving parts and components that get put together in different ways on site, I think it's more scalable and probably a safer business model to handle that inelastic or that elastic demand from projects.
Yeah, again, the return on investment, if we, as I say, we service a number of industries. If we go to certain industries, we will be able to get off them a very clear indication on what their return on investment is if they invest in a line of robotics or automation. They will tell us what they do. Now, when we are when we're currently going into the industry now, trying to understand it a lot more, we don't get a clear answer on what the return on investment is. What are the costs in this industry? What are the things that are going to make it work? It's very unclear to us how we have to act within to get this return on investment model sorted out. And as we keep saying, it's got to be a lot more flexible, so it's going to be a lot more difficult to really understand whether or not you're spending your money in a wise way. So what I'm trying to say is that the money that you're going to spend, be very, very cautious and very, very clear on understanding what you're going to be saving. Don't just jump into it. Have a process of very, very clearly understanding what your goals are, what your savings will be, all the way down to the detailed level, and then you'll understand whether or not it's worth investing. We're not in the business of supplying robots for the sake of it. We're in the business of sustainably supplying automation to keep an industry sustainable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to the credit for the last presenter, we mentioned concrete as an example, or an industry that we can turn to as somebody that has done this ROI type of argument in the past. Are there other industries that any of you have seen that have been successful with the introduction of technological solutions and showing that business case?
Well, I can say we were fortunate enough for 3 years, we worked on the Model 3 line with Tesla as our largest customer. We had a bunch of people there. And one thing I saw that was really interesting is the demand, once they got the demand up, right? So back to like construction having repeatable demand that fills the factory in a more sustainable way instead of being more lumpy with projects. Once they had the demand to Model 3, I remember we were involved with this spraying robot cell for paint, right? They had a paint area for the Model S. And then when they did the Model 3 in Fremont, they had like a better system for robots on tracks and stuff like that with spray. And then when they were designing the Shanghai plant, I remember hearing a little bit, they had like reduced the robots in half, so the system. And then the next iteration, again with that demand, was that they just started dunking the whole body in white into a tank with robots, but they're just mounted, heavy payload robots that can drop and move the tank. So we went from, kind of inefficient, humans spraying to a couple robots spraying to half the robots spraying to, wait a second, let's just get our body in weight to dunk it in the tank, right? So, and why could they iterate like that into a better ROI ultimately? At the end of the day, it's more efficient in the factory because they have the demand curve, continuously improving and forcing them to create that opportunity. So I think from a digital adoption technology, if you get the demand up, then it forces you to really have to look for innovation, and innovation will obviously bring ROI. At least that's the bet. That's a good example from another industry that I've seen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to add to that as well. So that's exactly what happens. So I'll give you a for instance as well. So in the early 80s, car industry, they had massive framing gates to put cars together. I was part of that push. You'd have framing gates. There were $5-6 million per gate. They would have 4, 5, 6 robots around it, and they would frame a car. And gradually, as the product changed, as they understood automation more, as they changed the product to make it more simple, the tooling costs went drastically lower, the automation costs went down, the robot count, and I know we sell robots, went down because the product own the value in full assembly. So this is a journey that took a massive industry 50 years to get to a point where they're dipping a car from these massive lines to where they are now. And that's what will happen here. But again, it's all about the product. It's all about standardizing as much as you can and making it as flexible as you can so that the cost of automation and the cost of robotics or whatever you want to call it goes down as your knowledge and your product gets better and better, because there'll be less to do on it. The more you have to do to a product, the more it costs. So design it so there's less to do, and then you're on a winner. And that's all of these industries had it the same way, and now it's your turn in construction to go into this journey. But fortunately, we've got the benefit of hindsight in the past few years to say this is what we need to do. So you're in a good position to move forwards. You didn't have to do it the first time.
That also really makes the point for DFMA, right? None of this would have been possible if the designers wouldn't have known what is manufacturable or where manufacturing technology is. And so that level of integration goes against the fragmented industry that we still have, right? Unless there is an immense information exchange between different companies, or companies start to vertically integrate more to have that knowledge in-house and develop that. As you say, it can take 5, 10, 15 years to do that, multiple product cycles. I think that's really important to understand. That kind of optimization will have to come from companies that have that experience in both product design and manufacturing technology.
Yeah, I can agree. And I think the collaboration between different companies, they are working very diligently and doing great projects. The more collaboration you can have across the board between companies, the journey will be much, much more easily. There's a lot of great work going on around the globe. We're very fortunate to work with people in Europe, in Asia, in North America, Canada, USA, Brazil. So we see a lot of work that's going on. So, and a lot of it is being done in the same way by different areas. If this can be organized in some way that those benefits can be transferable, then the industry will move a lot quicker than it's likely to do if everything is done in silos outside of each other's knowledge.
Yeah, and flipping back to construction and ROI in that front, like Stephen, you really nailed it on the head with be hyper-focused in what the problem is you're trying to solve, what ROI you're trying to get going into investing software. Construction, while has been hesitant to adopt software, to invest in software comparatively to other industries and other verticals, also see customers get super excited by every point solution that their bank or their budget can handle. They get spread too thin, and they just lose that focus there versus starting with that laser focus, getting ROI, getting value there, and building off of that momentum versus trying to do everything perfect at once. And then employees get frustrated. You bring in more point solutions. You try to do it all over again without understanding the appetite for change within your organization or the people that you may collaborate with on the construction projects.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I know, intuitively, whenever we start talking about the business case for investing in digital tools, your mind naturally goes to how much money can we save by doing this ultimately. But certainly there are other things that we can use to make a business case for investing in these types of tools. I could think of project delivery timelines, better data, sustainability goals, some risk aversion, things like that. Are there what other I guess topics are people showing interest in as far as reasons for investing in these tools other than just money savings?
Well, in construction, it's already been touched on, but you have this upcoming labor shortage. You have this risk of not finding or attracting top talent. So when you adopt top technology, it's definitely a recruiting factor that we see with our customers, and that young folks want to go somewhere that are tech forward focused, invest in their tech stack and their employees as well.
Yeah, we're seeing that as well. So, and we're seeing that in multiple. It's not again. I keep citing other industries as well, but there are customers that we've had in the past which specifically detailed. We have to make more money. We have to have a return on investment on money. Some of the industries, including this one, were talking to us. Well, if we don't do this, we haven't got the people to make the product, and we're out of business. It's to that level. Now for an indication, there's a lot of general contractors that know that there's going to be a lot of the work that they do on site will be moving to the factory. They're not ready to move to the factory. So what their indication is they have to now move it into a factory. So for them, it's not just people, but it's going out of business because they're not going along with the time. So their return on investment is just they are very worried that they'll be out of business, full stop. And that is happening as well, significantly in the States, in the United States. Less so in Europe, but certainly in the United States.
I think it's quality as well. I think when it comes to digital tools, as in software tools, it's the planning quality and the execution quality, the knowledge of how the building actually looks like before it's being built, which surprisingly is still a sales point in our industry. And then also the manufacturing quality, of course, using those kinds of tools, equipment, machinery just dramatically increases the level of precision and quality, which also actually changes what we can do. Previously, with manual labor, you don't really talk about millimeters of precision, but with manufacturing equipment such as robots, you do, and then suddenly you can actually change the way you put pieces and parts together in your factory. So there's a whole level of quality increase that we haven't really seen yet in building construction, and I think that together again with mass timber also makes a really big difference, because you have this beautiful and precise material that you can really work with really well in a manufacturing environment.
Yeah, and again, we're not, as I say, we're not a construction people. What we hear and when we talk to construction companies, some indication that up to 25-30% of the value of the construction of a building goes in the garbage. So we're talking, if you build 4 hospitals, one of them goes in the garbage. That's astounding. That's astounding. If we look at other industry service, 5% is a big deal. So the scrap, the quality, and the value of having the quality and less scrap is enormous potential. And I tend to believe that could be the case. You guys would know a lot more about that than I do, but these are the numbers that we're being told, which makes us very, very much more prone to continue our journey in construction.
That's really, yeah, very interesting. Thank you. So obviously we've heard a ton about the benefits of digitalization here. So we're going to kind of flip the script and talk a little bit about some of the challenges of digitalization and maybe some of the obstacles, and most importantly, how do we overcome them?
Okay, I'll jump in on that. So I think from what I've learned from the kind of mass timber industry specifically, and maybe a guy like Brent or something over there probably could tell you exactly what the demand is and how many projects and how much supply there is in the market to serve for CLT, let's say, or mass plywood panels. With this big uptick in production, in demand for mass timber projects, there's obviously a lot of people building factories in mass timber in the United States, and new players, new entrants coming into the market. My guess is that it's probably not quite meeting the full demand. If all the projects were to get approved and go into production at the same time, we probably couldn't meet that demand. The last time I saw something like this was in a different industry. Before I started this company, I worked in mining and construction, but I was in a mining industry. So in 2002, if anyone was in that world, there was $3 million truck, Komatsu trucks, just sitting on stilts because they couldn't get tires. So there was a big global tire shortage. And what they did to solve that was so you have Goodyear and all the major tire suppliers. So these mining companies, they were actually invested into the supply chain of the tires. So they would actually give money to Goodyear to build a line, part of it, and then secure certain demand in the future. And I think what's really challenging for a mass timber fabricator at the moment is you're making big long-term investments into a factory with short-term kind of like projects, right? Maybe a year or two, let's say, production. And that would be amazing. I don't know if this is ever going to happen in our industry, but if there was a way for the builders of projects or those major players to actually invest in, smoothing out some of that security of demand for the producers, even prevent, because you only go as fast. Like most of these factories have one or two, CNC machines. They're pretty much the entire factory's bottlenecked at the CNC machine. They can't go any faster. It's all tool time, right? You're just optimizing for tool time. The more cuts you do on the panel, more tool time, the more bottleneck there is. So, it's interesting. If we do have a skilled labor shortage, there'll be more people want to build off-site. If more people want to build off-site, there'll be more demand into factories. If it's mass timber is going to pick up, there's not nearly the supply to handle that. I wonder if there's a way for the industry to invest in that supply to some degree. This is have to get very creative, but if there's a way to offset some of those capex costs and then secure demand, secure supply later, and allow to kind of smooth out the curve of demand and supply in the market, that would be pretty interesting, because I can imagine it's very challenging to build a factory not knowing, and spend 20, 30, 40 million dollars setting it up and maybe having the next year or two of capacity planned, but after that you don't know, right? So maybe it's a 10-year payback. So that's an interesting thing that would be nice to see if there's a way to invest in the supply chain that way.
Yeah, our biggest challenge, I may say. So we spoke a lot about the labour shortage. We've spoke about the need for buildings, the excessive need to build these buildings. But what hasn't been really thrown into the equation is the affordable housing. Lots and lots of people need affordable housing. Now, for us, again, that's a big opportunity because there's lots of potential opportunity for automation. But our biggest challenge is really getting the current automation community to pivot to the construction industry to support this activity. So we're actively looking and we're talking to a number of our key automation partners on if they will move into the construction industry, because there is not a great deal of automation suppliers and solution providers that can get into this space and do what we're talking about. So our biggest challenge is educating our current automation base, getting people educated in how we can help this industry, and trying to move the automation sector into the construction industry to satisfy what will be needed in the next 5 to 10 years. That's our biggest challenge. And so we have to think to ourselves, well, how do we do that? I know we're an automation technology supplier, but without that solution system or these people in place, we won't be able to sell our products. So that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, and I would say for Procore, it's a solution that's an unlimited user model that touches project stakeholders, from the developers to the design team, to the contractors, to the subcontractors, to the suppliers. So trying to get all those people on one project on the same page on the one system and convince them to use it in a certain way it's a lot of folks to get on the same ship. And for Procore, the goal is to continually make the software as user-friendly, as easy to adopt as possible, but then also continue to develop the software to solve true problems that the construction delivery method runs into, and not just release shiny new tools that sound cool, but actually impact either the bottom line of the project, or reducing the risk on the project, or the entire portfolio of projects. As Javier mentioned earlier, it's just not about one project, but about the entire portfolio.
You mentioned constraints. I mean, we're going into already in the downturn, likely high interest rate environment, potentially a recession, growing recession. I think folks are going to be looking for ways to get costs down, whether we want to face it or not. One thing that is good about technology, it's even in an inflationary environment, it's inherently deflationary. Typically, new technologies come in as sometimes an order of magnitude less expensive, have different business models. You mentioned unlimited users. The cloud makes things little bit more democratized. But I would say that's definitely an issue for investing in digital tools when you go into a recession, right? So there's definitely going to be challenges to make those cases in a downturn. I think those are challenges we're all going to face, maybe we're already facing. And I think it's going to force people to pick and choose the products and the platforms, the technologies that really, really work for them and have the biggest bang for their buck. That's the reality I think we're all going to be facing the next 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from our perspective, the way I started this whole presentation is anytime you're dealing with an innovative technology here, you have you have fast movers that are solutioning these problems right away. And the biggest challenge becomes, how do we get everybody to speak the same language, right? We have a bunch of different companies doing a bunch of different great work, but the underlying communication platforms and whatnot are just not there. They're not standardized, right? So great example from our perspective is BIM, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So, BIM is a very subjective term depending on who you talk to about it, right? So BSI, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, wrote a standard on what exactly is BIM and how do you implement that, what are the common data environment requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Recently, when I say recently, we're talking like standards world recently, so like 4 years ago, this turned into ISO 19650, which is now the international standard for BIM. And there's 6 different parts of that, from design and construction to asset management to cybersecurity concerns, et cetera. So just getting everybody on the same page about what they consider best practices and what are the critical requirements is such an important challenge to overcome in order to scale the industry effectively from our perspective. So, all right, we are getting low on time here, so I just wanted to throw one last question at each one of you and get your take on this. So obviously, digital transformation can be daunting. That's why we're here talking today. So just from each one of you, if we could get one immediate step that somebody that's considering taking the leap into digital technologies can do coming out of this meeting today, what would that be? Just one thing. We'll start down at the end. Javier.
Me first? No.
Yeah.
I think it's a tough question because it depends what kind of business you are, but...
you can skip if you want.
I was going to see how these guys answered first, Dale and mine. I don't know. I mean, practically speaking, as a business owner, I would say just getting rid of any file-based system. So just getting, that's probably a nerdy, not very useful thing, but like having a database, a cloud-based system for all your data management, file management, get rid of, if anyone emails you an attachment, again, slap them. Just kidding. But a couple teammates of mine are here that I don't like email attachments. But I think just overall from a business perspective, yeah, having a platform like a Procore or others that data management, we use Ignite, for example, for these types of things. A really smart way to manage your business, share links, not files, and work more collaboratively. I think I'll talk my own books a little bit. I think there's a big movement around simulating construction processes first. Every single project should be simulated first. Every step of the way, a sequence, and understand that in a 3D, 4D environment, not just on pieces of paper, because most people can't understand those things. So I think that's a practical way to make a meaningful impact on just about any project with good simulation to get buy-in and have everyone understand what you're going to build and how you're going to build it before you actually build it. In the robotics world, I'm guessing you never would do anything without a simulation first. In construction, we still tend to rely on people's what they have in their heads. So I think simulation has a lot of opportunity in construction.
I think that was more than one, but that's okay.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to cheat too, probably, and give a couple answers. But
let me go first. That was your fault. That was your mistake.
No, what Stephen mentioned earlier, and what I double tapped on, really understanding what the problem is you're trying to solve and prioritizing and executing in line with those problems down the line. And the second part is definitely have or leverage your network and understand what other folks are using, what success they had, what troubles they ran into in adopting technology. I think a lot of success in whatever the project is in life or at work is proper expectation setting, and then definitely top-down understanding of the why behind the investment in the technology. And the way that the business is going, the reason why the investment in that software and the expectations of the users who are going to be leveraging that technology moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I'd echo what Brandon says there. I think it's very key that in our world, within your world, it's very key that you really understand what you want to do, where you want to go with it, and then what's even more important is because these are technologies we're talking about, is finding a solution partner that can offer a solution-based answer and have a trusted solution provider that's going to tell you things that you might not want to hear, but accept sometimes that you're going to need help.
All right. No pressure.
Well, I would maybe say in general, reach out and collaborate more, or from within integrate more. Think more about the adjacent fields and disciplines that are affected by your business and the ones that you affect with your business. I think we need that higher level of integration generally.
Great. Thank you. We've just got a couple minutes for questions here, so if anybody has anything, feel free to head to the microphone. Or 1 minute? One question. Oh, okay, even better. Did you have the question, or?
No, but I could.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay. So yes, so this is your wrap up. So thank you guys, first of all. That was a tremendous conversation. Thank you as well for the moderation. So I guess my question very quickly to you guys is, speaking from the architecture design side of things, you talk a lot about sort of the recalibration of the kind of delivery side of the project. Clearly the role of the architect is going to change quite dramatically. You know, you're talking about industrial design, right? So what's your experience of that? I mean, have you found that the profession is changing with you? Are they deer in the headlights? Are they enthusiastic supporters? What's been your experience? Really quickly, because otherwise we're not going to get our tea and coffee.
Mixed.
That's very fast. Intelligent City is design driven. Our mission is to build better housing and better livability. And that's really what sparked this whole innovation. And we are architects as well, so we take over that. So for us, it's really that level of integration. We're taking that seriously from an architecture, from a design point of view, right? And the idea is that we develop designs and buildings that you know have a higher level of design quality than what you could otherwise achieve. So I think knowing what is buildable and knowing the technologies that are available to you is incredibly important for architects. And I think some architecture firms realize that and invest in that, and others do not, right? There are many good comparisons with other industries. I think the tailor is a very good one, right? There are still tailors out there that do custom suits and they have their little business and it's working quite well, but there are also really big companies that have systemized how fashion is being made, and they don't have worse designs. They have maybe even better designs sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Great. There's no pressure to answer. I mean, for sure, if you've got something to add, that would be great.
No,
Yes.
I was going to say architects and design teams probably are not the biggest fans of Procore. Most likely it's an unlimited user model, and it exposes them to a lot more people on the project than they probably used to be used to 10 plus years ago. But through that open communication, collaboration, I'm optimistic is one of Procore's core values that the design teams will embrace Procore more and more in the future.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have, like in other industries, again, I'll say it again, inside the design process, manufacturing people that can assist in the design for manufacturing. It has to be a team event. It cannot be a one-person event.
Thank you.
Yeah, construction is the ultimate team sport, which is really great, and the AEC world in general is so collaborative. I think it's potentially the return of the master architect concept when you start getting into these system-based approaches. So I think there was like the master architect, you know, however many years ago, then it became very fragmented and specializations, you know, supporting the architect. And what I've seen now slightly creeping back in is almost as you get into more system-based design, is the master architect concept could be returning. specifically if you start building products, like buildings as products and these types of things. So that could be a trend, and I think if that's the case, then it'd be really good for the industry.
Great. That's an excellent, encouraging place to end this session. So thank you again, you guys, and thank you, Keith, for moderating so efficiently.